Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hero News. For your Monday, it is the 13th, the day of our Lord, 13th of January, March 2023. How you doing, bro?
Oh, not too bad. Not too bad at all.
Busy?
Yeah, been a fun day at work with Mr. Concrete Cutter right outside the shop. So that's good. All day.
I have just seen something from David. Do you want to Google this super quick? This must be literally breaking news if it's the case. Luxon can't catch a break, but breaking news. National Party leader Christopher Luxon has just tested positive for COVID-19 and is self-isolating. I like it when we don't know what the fuck is going on and people watching tell us. Have a look for that. Bring that story up if that's a literal breaking news story. Wonder who he was with today, and I wonder who else. Oh, you don't have to do that anymore, do you? Other isolated. Thank you, David. We're always up for live breaking news. See if you can find anything, bro, and we'll have a squiz. So there we go. Anything you can see? Anything come up?
Not in the first sight.
Just go to stuff.co.nz and see.
Yeah, nothing on stuff.
Nothing on stuff.
Where have you found that, David?
Yeah, Dave, where have you found that? Post a link. Unless we're being punked. You've been punked, bro. All right. Let me say, Emma, have you contacted me? Emma won our book last week. Still sitting. Look, it's literally sitting right here with Emma's name in the.
Yes, thing. David, very on the ball.
Yep.
14 minutes ago on One News.
Okay, show us. You want to show us? Want to share screen? I bet your screen's in portrait.
Always.
Okay, national leader Christopher Luxon test positive. Well, I hope he has an okay run of it. No one wants to have a bad run of it. National Party leader Christopher. Oh my goodness, he was at Big Gay Out, wasn't he? I'm pretty sure he was at Big Gay Out because I saw.
Not Chippy that you'd really be able to tell. He was at a barbecue surrounded by New Zealand Defence Force staff.
We're going to play a story tonight, and I thought I saw Chippy at Big Gay Out, definitely, because I used him as a thumbnail. But also, I thought they cut to a picture of Christopher Luxon there as well. I mean, there would be a super spreader event if ever you needed one. Massive amount of people, close proximity. Gosh, that'd be about right too, because it used to be at Point Chev. You go down Point Chev, the main road of Point Chevalier, and I guess it is Central West Auckland, and there's a park at the very end of the road. That's where Big Gay Out used to be. We used to go every year. Don't know if it's still there, but there we go. Is there any other information other than what we've been told?
No, just that. That's all I've been able to find.
All right. Well, we'll keep you updated. I mean, there's not really much more to report other than that, is there? Other than he's tested positive for COVID-19, which means we won't be seeing him in public for at least 7 days. And we'll see what happens. All right. I thought I might share with people tonight a couple of really quick clips of my podcast coming out tomorrow. We'll do that at the end of the show for what's coming up in the next couple of days, I think. Let's do this right now. Let's say a big, huge thanks to all of our patrons for being involved and being on board. You can see there's a new layout to the patrons board right now. We've got people in their positions, and Finn Sargison is over here. Got a name check Finn because he dropped off the thing a few days ago, but apparently I got told off and he's right there again now. Finn Sargison's back. And Rob Burney takes, I guess, pride of position as our senior producer. Senior producers, super patrons, fuel and coffee runners, FUELs and coffee runners. So thanks, guys, for being involved. We genuinely appreciate it. I mean, it doesn't really matter, I guess, if we get behind the curtain to tell you, but I genuinely downloaded the Patreon dollars from the weekend and it's going towards paying internet and it's going towards paying this system we use called StreamYard, which is $103 a month to have a membership to it. And so thanks very much. We appreciate it. You help us at least not cost out of our back pocket. Well, it still does, but not as much the stuff that we do. So we appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming on board. If you're interested in being a part of what we do, as it says on the bottom of the screen, you can just head to patreon.com/big hairy testicles. No, big hairy news. I was just joking. It's not really testicles. I was just joking. Oh, yes, here's a good question. Doesn't it mean that Nicola Willis is now acting leader of the opposition? I guess that probably would be the case. I mean, he will still be the leader, but if there's anything in the House, obviously he won't be there this week. So, I mean, unless he gets properly crook, and genuinely no one hopes he does. Certainly no one involved with making of the show. You people watching, you can have your own opinions. Because COVID sucks. I mean, I don't want anyone to have a bad time with it. It sucks. It eats the hairy bird.
I mean, I think if anything, there's a message there that it's not over. Like so many people acting like it's over, and as it mentioned in that story, cases are climbing.
Yeah,
I know it's ripped through the university halls of residence right throughout the country.
Oh, it's done it again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that makes sense, though. I mean, okay, let's make it clear. I'm not doing a lab leak theory on the big gay out, but it would make sense that would be a huge number of people in close proximity. That would be an easy place to get, just like the halls of residence is one as well. So
lots of big events and concerts over the weekend as well. You had My Chemical Romance in Auckland. You have Snoop Dogg concerts Christchurch in Auckland as well. Big day out. Yep, lots of people.
If anyone went to Snoop Do Double Jizzle, was the sound as bad as everyone was saying? People were saying the sound was really, really, really bad. So
I tell you what, talk about My Chemical Romance, right? So I'm a massive music snob. I like punk rock. I'm not one of these emos with their tight jeans and their sad faces. And that's why I didn't buy My Chemical Romance tickets when they were first on sale 3 years ago, when the concert was actually supposed to happen. Oh my God, I have so many friends that went to that concert, and I have regrets. It looked like an amazing show.
Oh dear.
Damn my snobbery.
Speaking of amazing shows, I'd go to any live show. Like I wouldn't there if I had the time and the money, I would go to any live gig, any big name that came through. In fact, I mean, like I went to Michael Jackson when he was in Western Springs, and one of the reasons I went was just to go. It felt to me like seeing Michael Jackson at not Western Springs, sorry, it was at Ericsson Stadium. It felt to me a bit like, if you had a chance to see the Beatles in the 60s and you didn't go, I would imagine 30, 40, 50 years later, you'd be going, oh shit, I could have seen them, and you could have been like, what? That was one of the reasons I went to see Michael Jackson. It was, I mean, I like his music. I'm not saying I'm not a fan, but he wouldn't be number one on my list. But I just knew that the so-called king of pop, my kids heard that, in 30 years from then, I had a chance to see him and I didn't. So I went.
I mean, that's why I saw Guns N' Roses just before I moved down from Wellington. I'm not a massive Guns N' Roses song. I like the singles. My partner really likes them and that sort of thing. So I thought, why not? Managed to pick up some tickets for $60. Yeah. Amazing show.
At
the time of my life was really great. So sometimes, and this is coming from a massive music snob, you got to get out of your own way.
Now, speaking of massive shows, let's have a talk. And if you've seen this in the chat, let us know about it at Chris Rock's latest special. Now, there is a lot to talk about with Chris Rock's latest special. It was the first thing that Netflix has ever carried live. So they broadcast it live as it was happening in real time, and then they edit it. So if you go to Netflix now and you load it up, it says broadcast live, edited for on demand or whatever it is. Because I mean, I'd forgotten that it was broadcasting live, and I watched a couple of lines from it and I was like, what? Normally they sort of record, or they record like 5 different sets and they take the best of them and turn it into one thing. It was like that, you kind of flubbed that word. And then I remembered afterwards that was live. So that there was grace for that as well. And that's the first thing. What do you think, Chewy, about Netflix doing stuff live? Because I was thinking, if they start down that path, I mean, they're losing a little bit of market share. I don't know why everyone's freaking out about it. Yes, they've lost a few people, but that's, I think, mostly because they gained a huge amount through COVID when everyone was at home.
Yeah.
But if they start down the live trap, then that opens up things like sporting events. Imagine Super Bowl on Netflix, you know, all sorts of things if they do this. So it's an interesting pivot in their practice.
I mean, I think it's a cool idea personally. I mean, Netflix has always pumped a pretty reasonable amount of money into comedy specials, and they're expanding that outside of the US and the UK and stuff like that. We've had some Australasian specials which have been really good.
Yep.
I think the idea of trying to do a live show is really cool. I mean, it adds a kind of danger factor to it, doesn't it? That you're not sitting there and watching the conglomeration of three different tapings of that afternoon or something like that. Yeah, if they can pull it off, sure.
Apparently, he got paid $40 million for it as well, so you know it's not too bad.
Oh, it's not.
So
bad.
he did. So basically, he did. You know, as American stand-ups do, I guess all stand-ups do, but American in particular, they tour for a year. They get their show. In fact, when I did my podcast with Ursula Carlson, if you have a look at Ursula Carlson's page, it may be different now, but her website, it's got a bunch of gigs going up until about the start of March, and then from the middle to end of March, there is a brand new show. So what she does is she starts the new show at the Melbourne Film Festival. She tours it for a year. And then the idea is you record it at the end, and it increases in length by about a half hour because more stuff comes out as they go through the year. And so this is what the American, you know, all the American stand-ups do is they tour for a year and then they do a special. So he's probably made another 10, 20, $30 million touring that for the year. And then Netflix goes, here you go, 40 mil. He does one show. It's live, so he doesn't have to do any of the editing or anything. And off he goes into the distance. And what he does is murders Will Smith in the process. Sorry, you go, Joey.
I was just going to say, I think Ursula's the first and only so far New Zealand comedian to have a Netflix special.
Yeah, I think so. She was on the they did like a worldwide one where she got a slot, and then they got her own special as well.
I'm pretty sure she got $40 million as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe she got more actually. She probably got 40 million rand, which is about $8, isn't it? So listen, if you haven't seen the Chris Rock has a really unique style. He repeats himself over and over and over and over and over again. And the one I always think about was he does this routine back in the day about talking about the difference between being wealthy and being rich. And he goes, I'm not talking about rich. I'm talking about wealth. I'm not talking about rich. And he says it like over and over again. And the example he gives is Shaquille O'Neal, for those who don't know, is a basketball player, Shaq. He goes, Shaq is rich. The person who signs Shaq's check, they're wealthy. So he makes it a really clear distinction between rich and wealthy, but he keeps repeating that line, and he does it a lot, and he does it in this. And I think for some people it can grate them the wrong way. I been a Chris Rock fan for a long time, so I just know it's his style. Like Dave Chappelle's got that style where he slams his microphone into his leg all the time. It's just the thing he does. Chris Rock repeats his line over and over and over again. So of course the whole crowd is watching the stand-up routine, wanting him to address the Will Smith situation and the slap because it was a year before this was recorded. So pretty much Chris Rock has been quiet about the Will Smith slap at the Oscars, and we're talking about this tonight because we're going to talk about the Oscars at the end of the show. And the last 8 minutes of the show is just Chris Rock annihilating Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith. It's absolutely brutal. I did a tweet in the weekend that said something like, you know, Will Smith slaps Chris Rock on stage. Chris Rock murders Will Smith in his latest special. And Netflix is incredibly litigious, and they will remove everything off YouTube they can. So it's very hard to find a copy of it online on YouTube. So I'm not going to just play it to keep this taken down. But what I will do is read one part of it, which is particularly brutal. Now, obviously, this is the worst thing. Chewy, it'll probably grate you the wrong way because you're a comedian. Reading someone's jokes out is the worst thing in the world to do. But I'm going to read you a part of what he said, and you will see how brutal it is. So this is Chris Rock on stage in his special, the transcript on NME.com. He says, Will Smith practices selective outrage because everyone knows what the fuck happened. Everyone really knows I had nothing to do with that shit. I didn't have any entanglements. I do not have any entanglements. And for people that don't know, and everybody knows, Will Smith's wife was fucking her son's friend, okay?
Jesus.
Now, I normally would not talk about this shit, but for some reason, these N-words put that shit on the internet. I have no idea why two talented people would do something like that. Fucking low down. What the fuck? We've all been cheated on. Everyone in here has been cheated on. I'm going to question that. I don't know if that's true, but anyway, none of us have ever been interviewed by the person that cheated on us on television. None of us. And what he does is he's holding the microphone to his mouth and he goes, none of us were like, hey, I was sucking somebody else's dick. How does that make you feel? And then he goes like that with the microphone in front of him. So, how does that make you feel? Why the fuck would you do that? And this is the line. She hurt him way more than he hurt me. It was brutal. Utterly, utterly, utterly brutal. And of course, everyone's on Chris Rock's side because it's his audience. And if you haven't seen it, it's a great stand-up special, full stop. But it's the stuff about Will Smith was brutal. Any thoughts, Joey?
That is savage, and I think everybody knew that it was coming. As you said, these guys have been working on shows for like a year before they end up recording it. He would have been workshopping the best way to twist the knife. And there was a lot of talk about Will Smith's relationship around that time anyway. I don't think it's surprising. I think it's the fact that Chris Rock, of all people, held his tongue as far as public statements go for this long, and then just pretty righteous is the wrong word, but it must feel pretty good for him.
Yeah, I imagine it was. And there's this other part where he talks about how Will Smith is seen by everyone as, and he goes, as a bitch. You know how people say that, like. And then he talks about all these people who thought he was a bitch. And then he goes, and then he slapped me, who's so much more smart. He goes, what a bitch thing to do. So it was, and I think there was one or two things that Chris Rock could have done. The first is just stayed absolutely quiet and never say anything. And the second is absolutely address it. And he did it. And it was brutal, right? Whether you love it or hate it, whether you think it's appropriate or not, all I'm saying is it was brutal. Now, Will Smith has allegedly responded to it. This is off BuzzFeed. According to Entertainment Tonight, Will has responded to the special. A source close to Entertainment Tonight said Will is embarrassed and hurt by what Chris said about him and his family in his Netflix special. He didn't watch it, but he had people tell him what Chris said.
Yeah, now here's an interesting point, right? Now it's reversed.
Yeah,
Will's back to being the victim again.
Yep.
So, I mean, if he plays his cards right, Chris is going to look like a real dickhead.
Well, he could, but I mean, my podcast tomorrow, I talked to Michelle Acourt in the comedy podcast that I do, and we talk a little bit about jokes. Actually, Chewy, someone's asking you about this in the chat. You can, Gareth says as a comic, I'll put it up. Gareth says as a comic, who are your personal favorites or lesser known comics you really like? We'll get to that shortly. But this is what I thought. Talking to Michelle Acourt tomorrow on the Let's Talk Funny podcast, and we were talking about, punching up, punching down. We were talking about that sort of thing. And she was like, you can joke about anything, but the audience will tell you if they like it or not. Now, the problem I think is there's an audience for everything. So the audience can tell you, but in America with 330 million people, there's an audience for the most misogynistic, the most racist, the most this, the most that, anything. Are you trying to find that music?
Yeah. It's all right. I'm just going to mute my mic for a little bit and just find out where the fuck that's coming from.
And there's an audience for everything. So even if Chris Rock was seen as a bit of an asshole after this or not, then there's an audience still for it. And in those massive, massive markets, I guess that's the actual situation. Kooky, evening Kooky. Kooky's offered and attempted to pay a late fee because that's what Kooky does, because he's a madman. Oh, I think Chewy's out of here because things are happening on his end in the interweb. We'll see Chewy shortly, I'm sure. Kooky, thanks for your super chat. Appreciate that. Remember, you can always support us by super chats through the night, unless it's, of course, a controversially racist or abusive message. We don't have to mention that, but all super chats go up on the screen at all time. You're welcome to jump on board that way if you can. Or as it says on the bottom of the screen, you can help us keep making independent news by visiting patreon.com/big hairy news. Roe has a slightly different opinion. Even though Pinkett is a public figure, I took Rock's comments as an attack on his partner. Pinkett is a public figure. I think you mean Smith. I'm assuming you mean Will, because you said Pinkett. Pinkett is the wife. I took Rock to comment on his, which would be her partner. Smith defended his partner and was publicly humiliated. Smith defended his partner as he was publicly humiliated into it. Interesting. Yep, I think the footage speaks for itself that Will Smith thought it was hilarious until his wife gave him assholes about it. And then after he stopped laughing, he then went up and assaulted a man on stage. And whether people thought that, Chris Rock was being mean or not, there's never an excuse. Not that we have to actually, look, we're starting to debate it again. Did Chris Rock know she had alopecia? I've heard interviews that say Chris Rock did not have a clue she had alopecia. But even if he did, and even if he was being a complete see you next Thursday, like if he was being the biggest see you next Thursday in the world, to get up on stage in front of 1 billion people and hit someone is still not the correct response.
Still not. I mean, as far as Chris Rock's original G.I. Jane joke, it was a shit joke.
Yeah, it was a shit joke.
I said that at the time, but being comic, you can say a shit joke. You boo a bad comic, you don't get up on stage and smack him.
Yep. All right. And we're going to have a look at the Oscars a bit later on tonight. Obviously, one very big winner. I think 6 out of 11 wins they got. And we'll have a look at a few of the other things. And I want to play you what I think Jimmy Kimmel's best joke of the night was. But for now, let's get to the daily political news of the day. Now, I had Grant Duncan, PhD, on the show on Friday night. Grant Duncan's from Massey University, an associate professor there. He teaches politics and various other bits and bobs. We've had him on before. If you remember when we talked about Newshub having biased headlines and stuff for their polls, that was when Grant came on this show. Grant joined me in the DOC podcast on Friday night. Sorry, I'm going to get confused with all the podcasts. There's the DOC, there's the BHN, and there's Let's Talk Funny. So the DOC, Department of Conversation, which goes up most Friday nights, hopefully all Friday nights for this year. We'll see how that goes, though. And he talked about polls again, and he said, and we've talked about this, but just coming from an academic, I think it carries more weight than a couple of bearded buffoons, is that polls are a snapshot of the today. So when these things that we watch go into projecting what that means as seats in the House, that sort of nonsense, right? And although it makes for interesting talking points, the only thing that really matters from this is actually the poll results, and they're really interesting. So let's have a look at what came out on One News tonight.
Chris Hipkins has been in the job 7 weeks, so let's see how the dust has settled since our last poll in January. Here are the numbers. Labour is on 36, down 2. National is just behind on 34, sliding 3. ACT is on 11, up 1. The Greens have shot up 4 and are also on 11. New Zealand First is on 3, up 1. And Te Pāti Māori is also sitting on 3, up 2.
Now, let's stop here, because as I was saying that the projections are silly, the one thing the projections do show us is what the true percentages are. Because if you add all those up, oh geez, what have I done? 70, 81, 92, 92 plus 6, that's 98. So that's 98% there, right?
Yeah.
So obviously 36 plus 11 is 47 out of 92, plus 3 for the Māori Party is 50 out of 92. So in other words, what the projections, I said 92, out of 98, sorry, out of 98. So that's 98% there. So one of the things that the projections do show is what the true percentage would be, because that's not, if those were the results, Labour wouldn't get 36% of the seats because only 98% of the voters are counted for there. So they'd get 36% of 98%, which is how you can still have, like, we got 47% and we're a majority government, because it's the percentage of votes that don't make 5% or don't win a seat aren't counted. So that's how it kind of works. So that's the one thing it is actually useful for, not to say what the seats will be, but to say what the true percentages are. So before we go on, Chewy, any thoughts around what you're saying? Because the Greens and Te Pāti Māori in this poll are looking, there'll be a few bubbles being opened tonight.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good result from the Greens. I think the Curia poll that came out the other week, it wasn't a particularly good one for them. But I think when you get into the smaller parties, but you can get just quite big swings at times.
Yeah.
I think it shows. I think the most important thing here is that the major parties are going to need friends. Labour's going to need Greens, Nationals is unfortunately going to need ACT. That gives those parties like quite a lot of say, right? You go into negotiations. Is ACT going to play hardball to get a few of their key bananas policies
pajamas.
across the
Yeah.
board. You know, is David Seymour going to go, I want this job?
Well, the thing,
you
I don't know if you remember this, Chewy, but we had Simon Wilson, who has also been on the DOC in the last couple of weeks, on this show a few weeks back when he wrote a piece in the Herald called, the chance to be the most progressive government ever. And the point being, or he said he didn't say the most regressive, but he kind of said the worst, the best or the worst. And the reason he was saying is that was there's never really been a party, there's never been a government where there's only been two parties in. Right, when National went with ACT last time, they put the Māori Party on the side, so therefore they could go National Māori Party or National ACT, which means neither the Māori Party nor ACT had like, well, if you don't help us out, we're not going to put it through, because they just go, okay, ACT, you can sit in the corner, we'll just go with the Māori Party.
Yeah.
We've never really had a situation where it's only been two parties, and if it becomes just Labour Green, then yes, you're right, the Greens have a huge amount of power, like. We've seen American Congress and that sort of thing, 3 or 4 people holding up, like the cinemas of this world, holding up legislation, getting through and being able to use that to their own will. If this ended up being a National ACT or a Labour Green government and that was it, then that means ACT and the Greens have a huge amount of power, because without them, there's no government. Because on this thing, let's say that there was enough with either of those two, adding in Te Pāti Māori would be irrelevant, because they're already over the line. And that would also mean that National and Te Pāti Māori, or Labour and Te Pāti Māori, wouldn't be enough to get them across the line. So therefore, if these two largest minor parties can get there with just the major party, it'll be a really different parliament.
Yep. I think Kim in the chat here has absolutely nailed it. Labour's last term shows that they need the Greens to be progressive. And I think we're seeing that basically play out live with Hipkins. I mean, he's being strategic. I understand that, but he's hiffing out so many good policies.
We
at the
are
moment.
going to look at that. We've got the Newshub story on that as well to see exactly what's going on. So we'll come back to that. Yeah. So it'll be. I mean, I obviously from where we sit politically, I don't want to see a National ACT coalition. But if there is a coalition between two parties, it will be an incredibly different government that we've ever had under MMP before. It'll be interesting to see what happens. We'll keep going on this because there's some minor parties as well.
Let's have a look at some of the other parties now. And it's all pretty consistent over here. Top, Democracy New Zealand and New Conservative are all
Democracy
steady
New
on
Zealand.
one. Taking a look at how these numbers translate to seats in Parliament now. Let's head over to the debating chamber.
This is the interesting bit. I mean, the seats aren't interesting because it's the projection. But what it is interesting is it does show what the true. So it does show the true percentage. So in other words, Labour plus the Greens is half of all the seats, right? Because that's 60 out of 120. So those numbers we saw before equal 50% of the votes, which is a different way to think about it.
Yeah. They need 61 to
So
form
that
a
means
government. That means
they don't have
need
enough.
the 3 seats from the Māori Party to be able to lead the country. That's because if you add together these 14
and then the
seats
other
from
thing
ACT
is
and
the
National's
real
chunk of 43
percentage from the
seats,
right, if you have a look, 43 plus 14 is 57. So that's only 57 out of 120. So even with the Māori Party in at 3, the real percentage, forget the seats, but the real percentage with these 3 parties together is only 50. That would be a hung parliament in theory. So that's what I think we're going to look at from now on for the rest of this year to do with the projected seats. We're going to look at it as true percentages, because what that shows us is the left block is on 50% and the right block is on, I guess, less than 50%, probably 40, 45, 48, 47% in those actual poll numbers.
that's 57. And even
Sorry, bro, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say, my prediction is that's kind of the government, Labour, Green, Māori Party. If they can get everybody pulling in the same direction there, that'll be it.
It'd be really interesting to see whether the Māori Party could go with National again. I feel they couldn't. I think that I said this 2 weeks ago that, that the ACT Māori Party divide and David Seymour basically telling New Zealand that we should watch out for Rawiri because he's up to stuff. It's basically what he said. It might even be exactly what he said. Is actually, I don't know how that would work. And I guess if you think about pulling to the left, right? So if this is 50% Oh no, see, this would be the case because actually would mean that Labour and the Greens would not be able to pass any policy without the Māori Party, and the Labour and the Māori Party wouldn't be able to pass any policy. So there could still be quite a lot of negotiation there. The point being, if it was like 46-15, then actually it's only the Greens and Labour that have to negotiate. So that could make a difference as to kind of the policies we're seeing.
And then, of course, you've got the usual thing that happens around election is that you hear trumpets and the sky goes dark and then Winston comes in on a horse.
I knew you were going to say Winston. I could feel it in my bones. Just once. That's me only 3 times in a show he's going to turn up.
We can't say it 3 times.
And don't say it 3 times in the text or it'll turn up in your mirror. All right, let's keep going with the story.
And with the support of the Māori Party, that's not enough for a majority. So let's bring up the preferred Prime Minister numbers now and see how the leaders are getting on.
Any predictions? Do you know these numbers yet?
No, I haven't seen this.
Okay.
I'm going in raw.
I'm just going to, oh, sheesh, raw dog in it. Here we go.
Chris Hipkins is on 27, up 4, a steady climb. Christopher Luxon is on 17, a drop of 5. He hasn't been this low since the very beginning of his leadership. David Seymour is steady on 6. Winston Peters isn't in Parliament right now, but some still want him as Prime Minister. And even though Jacinda Ardern has stepped down, she still has support.
All right. Yours, sir.
Oh, God. Just put a stake through him. Get rid of him. Yeah, again, if you're Christopher Luxon's team, you're just like, oh, my God, what can we do? Like, you just can't rein this in at this point. This feels like an unstoppable decline. There's been nothing to bounce, and the trust issue is huge.
Yeah,
you can smell it on him every time he's on the telly. It feels like he's. I watched the new Creed 3 movie the other day. It feels like that fighter is just running out of puff. He's still swinging, but there's nothing behind it anymore. What do you do?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is now losing ground. So what they just said, for clarity, everyone probably heard it, right? But I'll say it again, is this is as low as he's been since he entered. So since he became the leader. Yeah. So he's spent the year building. And when I say to his credit, I guess what I'm saying is, to his political credit, was probably part of the reason that Jacinda Ardern split. Right, the pressure from him, the pressure from the other side, did brilliantly as the opposition last year, played all the right oppositional cards, and then they are part of the reason that a change is forced. Let's be honest, national pressure would be part of the reason, maybe not the whole reason, but part of the reason. And he comes out in the very first poll, Chippy's ahead of him, and in the second poll, he's 10% ahead of him. He's actually annihilating him. And if you think about Jacinda in there as well, there's 29% of Labour leader votes and 17 for them. So it's not looking good. And Chewy, I still don't think the right thing for them to do is going to be to biff him. But every time I see these things, I'm glad I'm glad I didn't bet with you on it. No slabs up for grabs.
Oh no, there was definitely a bet. We need to rewind the tape. Anyway, I think there's 2 questions here. If Luxon does make it to the election, is he so invested in this of being the National Party leader? And I say that quite deliberately. Is he invested in being the National Party leader, or is it very clear that he wants to be as the Prime Minister of New Zealand? If he is still there, will he weather the loss and keep going?
Right.
I don't think he will.
Well,
and then the second part of that is, will the party let him?
I think if he was to not want to be there as leader of the opposition, he's only been in for a term. Yeah. Like, if he's thinking that at the end of the term, his objective is to be the leader of the country and he's not prepared to put in some hard yards, then I have huge amounts of fear for national voters. If that's the person, if that was the case, I would be saying to them, what kind of man are you backing? That's basically going, if I can't get my way, I'm going to chuck my toy and leave. I just would be, I'd be devastated, not from my political desires, but certainly from from a country that potentially could have had someone that it's like my way or the highway. If that was the case, it's a big if.
But this is what we see from a lot of these guys in national is that they come in from the corporate world, they have a tilt at something to get something else on the CV, and then they end up on a board or several boards, or that they've just got it there. It's like they're collecting prefect badges or something. But he'll have no worries. He'll go, oh, okay, that was a fun diversion for a term. Now I'll just go and be a board member somewhere. I don't think it's not an ideological calling, put it that way.
All right, let's have a look at some more of the story. And there's a debate going on: was Christopher Luxon a big gay out or not? I think he probably was, and I think there's some footage coming up.
I think he was.
So after a cyclone-focused few weeks, that's how the numbers have landed, with 7 months until the election.
Sometimes as Prime Minister, you have to do some strange stuff. But the numbers show Kiwis are warming to him, squashing concerns. He's a stand-in.
I put my hand up for this job because I thought that we could not only refocus the government on the issues that matter, but go on to win the election. That's absolutely what I'm focused on.
The Prime Minister feeling the love, Christopher Luxon not so much. His preferred Prime Minister numbers are back to where he started.
Absolutely.
It's just been an extraordinary 2 months where there's been a huge opportunity and a role for the...
He started.
Not looking particularly flamboyant. I mean, like, I know you don't have to be flamboyant, but it seems to be part of the celebration of brightly coloured attire and stuff. Looks like he's just taken off his business frock and put on the shirt that he wears when he mows the lawns. Something like that.
Yeah,
maybe getting into the spirit of it. I think that is that park in Point Chev. It looks like what it is, I think.
It's just been an extraordinary 2 months where there's been a huge opportunity and a role for the government to play and the Prime Minister to play in managing the natural disasters. And so, it's not completely, it's quite understandable in many ways.
Chris Hipkins has gone from 0 to top of the leaderboard. Look at how he leapfrogged after becoming Prime Minister. Christopher Luxon shrinking in comparison.
People, know what I've done. They still don't know exactly who I am.
His numbers are better than Simon Bridges and Judith Collins when they led the opposition.
Think about that. 17% is better than the last two. That's not a particularly good indictment, is it?
But have a look at this comparison between Christopher Luxon here in blue and John Key, who of course went on to be Prime Minister after this. And Mr. Luxon is tracking in the wrong direction.
Going into the summer break, you almost look like a shoo-in to be the Prime Minister this year. Now it's sort of much more in the balance.
Oh, look, I'd say to this game, we've got a long, long way to go.
The Greens...
And that is true as well, remember? I mean, like, Labor has as much chance to screw it up as National does to do something that brings them back. I do note, though, that their Labor light policy last week of the ECE doesn't seem to have impacted their poll numbers. So it's almost a bit like, in fact, talking to Grant Duncan, I think on Friday night, I think he said that one of the issues now with National voters is they think they're going to, what's the word? Woke.
Oh, woke.
Because with things like that,
they're going still a thing.
Yeah, they think that National is going too far, and that will drive people other places. Perhaps ACT, if they're sort of more mainstream supporters, but perhaps some of those alt-right parties that are not going to make 5%, and we want them to all go and vote for. But perhaps I don't know. Much like we've been criticising Labor for the last year about not being progressive enough when we've had the ability to do it, maybe some people who are like, let's say, in our position, but on the other side, wherever that would be in the spectrum, are now criticising National for being too left, and they're losing trust for them. Maybe that's reflected in the polls as well.
I mean, I just thinking of him being at Big Gay Out, right?
Yep.
Most of their party voted against something that was a big issue for many in that community, is the banning of conversion therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And to have that, and then to basically just show your face there at all, I think it's just doesn't sit right. Put it that way. It's like, oh yeah, at the event we're all for this, but at any time it matters when we need to do a vote on something, absolutely not. You people, no.
I had a story too that I wanted to share tonight, but I don't think we've got time. There's a school in Northland, Christian school in Northland, closing down because they can't use conversion therapy anymore.
Yeah,
so they can't use conversion therapy, so they're closing down. They've been going for 30 years. So I'm We won't get to that tonight because we don't have time, because we've still got one other story and then the Oscars to go tonight, and then it's going to be so long, see you later, sayonara. But yeah, it's that conversation is still ongoing.
Yep.
Right, let's keep going with some more commentary.
Say Cyclone Gabrielle and flooding have sharpened our focus on
Yeah,
climate
maybe true.
change, hence their big bump.
Yep.
People are feeling the impacts of climate change. We are the consistent party to offer up those solutions.
Can we work with the Greens in a future government? Yes, we can.
But when it comes to Te Pāti Māori, he's lukewarm on the idea of a third dancing partner.
We've had a relatively constructive working relationship with the Māori Party this term.
Whether the Prime Minister likes it or not, the current polls and also recent polls would show that a discussion needs to be had. And we're looking forward to that discussion with the Prime Minister in the near future.
I would also say that Rawiri, he's predicting. Rawiri's predicting from these. There's no reason to think that there will be that conversation happening. And if that is happening, it'll be happening the day after the election. Certainly not in the days leading up to the election. All of them actually, their policy will be, the position for Labor will be, give us your vote. We want your vote. We want a majority government again. They're not going to get it, but that's going to be their vote. They're not going to be going and looking for, two different partners. Obviously, then we said this at the last election, no one's ever going to get a majority like that again. It was obviously extenuating circumstances, but Labor in an ideal world doesn't want a three-headed government. They want a one or two-headed. They prefer a one. They'll accept a two. They don't want a three. So that conversation that Rawiri's talking about certainly won't be happening before the election and will only happen after the election if it's absolutely essential. Unless, of course, Labor wants to build a supermajority like Key did. And when they build that, it still really means it's a two-party government with some people bringing it on board as an acknowledgement than anything else. Let's keep going.
With 13% of people we polled not sure how they'll vote.
That's big, 13%.
There's a big chunk of voters still up for grabs.
And Jess is with us now live. What do these numbers tell us about how Kiwis are feeling?
Well, look, when you dig into those preferred Prime Minister numbers, you do get the sense that people may not think that Chris Hipkins is particularly exciting, but he's perhaps doing better than they thought and they're willing to give him a go. The reason these numbers will be concerning for Christopher Luxon and frustrating is that because he spent a year trying to claw back that support and now he's back to where he started again. He is arguing that he hasn't had a lot of oxygen, and that's because Labor had a change of leadership and also the cyclone has...
but Labor had a change of leadership, which National was celebrating. So I'm not saying they're actively saying this, what Jess is saying, but it's a great freeze frame, by the way. It's intense. I'm on fire. But you can't, I'm not saying Luxon's saying this, but he can't come out and say that as an excuse now when they were dancing a jig when they had Labor. They thought it was the greatest thing that was going to happen to them. So you can't say on one hand, oh, we didn't have any courage because of change of leadership. And then on the other hand, yes, change of leadership. They're pathetic. You can't have it both ways, National, if that's what you're thinking.
Actually taken a lot of attention away from politics. We were polling during his State of the Nation where he got a bit of attention, but it's really only been this last week that things have kind of gone back to normal. So he does have a bit of a point there. If this trend continues for him, that's when he'll start to see the red flags and be in trouble, because after all, we've only got 215 days until the election.
There we go. Chewy, what are your thoughts, man? Anything you want to pick up on there?
Oh, look, I think his statement about Chippy is a little bit off, to be honest. He wasn't an unknown. I don't think people are sitting there going, oh, I'll give him a go. I think it is seen as a continuation of Jacinda Ardern. I said this last week. It's Jacinda Ardern with a penis. And for a lot of people, that penis counts.
I feel so wrong about that thought.
I know. I know.
No, I don't know if I agree
I'm
with
unhappy
you.
saying it. But
I don't know if I agree with you, because you're basically saying patriarchy and misogyny is why people would vote for Chippy over Jacinda. I would suspect that it's more to do with not to do. I'm not saying that that's not a part of our cycle and like that's a part of the voting base, but I would think the reason that there'll be lots of people coming back to Labor, back to them, is not because he's got testiculars, but because they were turned off by the overarching narrative, not that it was necessarily accurate, of COVID and the mandates and nanny state and big government telling us what to do. And they laid that all on Jacinda. And I think if it had been a Jacinda with a penis doing those same things, it would have been the same result for how much they hated that prime minister.
Chippy was the minister for the COVID response.
I know.
He was the minister of health. Are we looking for reason in some very unreasonable groups?
No, I guess what they're saying is they've just laid. That's why I said fair or not, and it's not fair. They've just the narrative is it's all Jacinda. She's in charge. Yeah. She's controlling. She's telling. She's the puppet master, and that's what I think the distance is. The distance is there are some people, even on the left, who have gone to the dark places of, how much in control she was. When you're right, because what the opposition is saying, I think, is probably fair about these guys have all been in lockstep and all on the same page for a very long time. It's not that different, but I don't think it's because he's got a penis that he's getting the bump. I think that could have a part to play in it, but I think, in my opinion, the bigger part to play is that previous person, Jacinda, was obviously, this is not what I believe, but this is the narrative, was a dictatorial, control freak, narcissist who was telling us all what to do. Now, you might say that sounds like the ravings of a misogynist, and you might be true. So I'm not saying it's nothing, but I guess I'm saying it's not everything. That's what.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the misogynistic talk that went around about Jacinda has just pretty much stopped dead in the water. Yeah. It's only the real hardcore nutters out there on Telegram that are really banging on about this stuff still. But yeah, I mean, it was a tonal shift, and I like to think that the conversation around Jacinda didn't carry weight with a bigger portion of the population, but maybe.
Doug also says this, what we're about to get to. Are we going to say Burge? Burge Doug? Burge Doug.
Burge Doug.
The difference is all the policies that Chippy has ditched, RNZ merger, hate speech, etc., etc. Yeah, and we're going to get to that literally right now. We're going to get into it, and we're going to have a look at it. So let's move on to the next part. They're calling it the policy inferno, just to be a little, we're not going to beat this up too much, but we'll just call it the policy inferno. But if people want a bit of a clearer understanding as to what has gone and what is staying, let's have a look.
The bonfire of the policies has grown into a towering inferno as Chris Hipkins refocuses his government on the cost of living. Transport projects were first to be chucked on, beginning with the plan to cut state highway speed limits. The cash for clunkers scheme has been scrapped, and with it...
Now, I'm going to ask a question about that, maybe in the chat, or maybe you can tell me. That's not that's not the rebate, is it?
No,
it's a different plan.
It's not. It's a different policy. It was it was aimed specifically at lower income users that traditionally have older and worse emitting cars and worse condition. Yeah, and it was just basically paying a better value than scrap as long as they bought an EV, like a secondhand Leaf or something like that.
No, thank you, Rob. Rob says, I was just scared the right one is the clean car. It's not that good because, like, after we get enough Patreons or patrons, we both go out and buy EVs, Chewy. Thanks to our patrons, we need to know we can still get that $8,000 discount. I was just making sure. That's all.
A plan to reduce car trips by 20%. Auckland Light Rail survived, but will be phased in. A planned container return scheme to encourage recycling has been shelved. The government's also decided not to give 16-year-olds the vote in general elections, and plans to reform alcohol law.
Well, actually, that's such a poor way to report that as well. She says that the government's decided not to give it to them. The government couldn't give it to them.
Also decided not to give 16-year-olds the vote. And
they couldn't. It had to be a supermajority of 75%, so they couldn't give it to them. But so I think the accuracy, not to correct the hosts here, is that not to put it to referendum and not to basically waste time on something that was never going to happen anyway.
General elections and plans to reform alcohol laws around sponsorship have been delayed. All that will save just over $1 billion to be pumped back into Kiwis' back pockets. Here's political editor Jenna Lynch.
Down with delicate extrication, Chris Hipkins is taken to excavation, digging out what's left of Jacinda Ardern's pet projects as he looks to free up cash for the cost of living and cyclone response.
We might be narrowing down the number of things that we do and doing the things that we are going to do more thoroughly and better.
Ironically, as he frequently casts his eye over the climate wreckage of Gabrielle, he's creating his own wreckage of policies designed to mitigate climate change.
Climate policy.
To remind me who she's married to again.
Very true.
Policies that we're talking about today would have made a very small contribution to our overall emissions reductions targets.
The Cash for Clunkers scheme that would have paid up to $10,000 to people to wreck their old gas guzzler and replace it with an EV is off to the policy chop shop. Worth $500 million, it was money announced as part of the government's first ever climate budget. Now that money isn't going toward climate mitigation at all.
If we had more Green MPs, this would not have happened.
Greenpeace is really horrified at the direction that the new Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, is taking this country and taking the environment.
So I don't want to sound like, I don't know, sort of a right-wing person, but to be honest with you, when it comes to getting elected, a portion of the country being annoyed with what this Prime Minister is doing when it comes to progressive policies will probably help them get re-elected. It will probably help them get re-elected because there is that fear, unwarranted in my opinion, of sort of further left policies amongst a growing number of people on the kind of central-ish area, central, centre-right, centre-left voting bloc. And actually, I feel like you are more likely to get elected with more centrist policies. And then what you do is you bring those more progressive policies back 3 days after you get elected, which I'm sure is the situation. Just like National won't do very much leading up to the election. And if you vote them in, people expect to see a whole bunch of different policies come out within the first 100 days of them getting in.
Which is shitty when you think about it, because you want to vote for a party based on the things that they say that they're going to do. If they're going to play those sort of games, I'm not a fan.
I agree.
Like I said, I can see the tactical or strategic reason that he's dropping a lot of these policies. But a lot of these policies are stuff that would do some good. I mean, the Auckland Light Rail thing, it's going to be phased in now. It was always going to be phased in. They weren't drop an entire working light rail system in one big hit. It's just boom, now it's there. It was always going to be phased in. And National's bleating on about it was not going to change that. It was going to take ages. It's going to be super expensive. But it brings Auckland in line with every other livable first world city having a better public transport system. Just drives me nuts that people are like, no, we don't want light rail in Auckland. So dumb. So dumb. The container recycling thing, that is something that other countries do with great success. I can't see why that is such a divisive policy to get across the board. I just think about my time in Europe going, oh, you mean I can put this thing in the thing at the supermarket and I get money out? That's amazing. I want that. Cash for clunkers, anything to speed up the adoption of EVs, that's got to be better in my book.
Yep.
I wish that was one that stayed. Yeah.
All right, we're going to keep going.
Our emissions reduction targets have not changed.
Just insert a bottle or can and off you go.
The environment just did not stop losing today. A container return scheme which would have paid people for recycling drink bottles and cans thrown in the trash for now.
It's also estimated to add small additional costs to households, then we don't want to be imposing those additional costs right at the moment.
Why?
And the kids that care about the environment, their future, just lost the shot to have a vote on it. The government's vote on the voting age, keep it 18, though they will allow for local council elections to make it 16.
Our message to government is that this is urgent. They think they can stall on a human rights issue, which just isn't good enough.
I'll be clear, I support a lower voting age, the age of 16. There isn't a parliamentary majority for that, so I don't intend to progress a bill that's doomed to fail.
66 people have died.
So is that cowardly or is that pragmatic? He says I support it, but it's not going to go anywhere. He didn't use this, but he might be saying, so why would we waste $30 million on a referendum if it's not going to go anywhere? So which is it though? Because if it's his belief then
Well, then
I just
then Labor should throw their weight behind it.
Well, maybe
like
it's
they should start banging the drum that this is time for these people to have their say in the country that they live in, the country that they pay tax in. Most of these 16-year-olds are working.
Yeah.
All of the decisions that Parliament make have a massive impact on their life.
Yeah. Well, look, the chat's got involved. Pragmatic.
It is. I hate it. I hate it. But it's correct.
Here's another one as well from the guru, the DIY guru. Tactically, this is smart politics for Labor. In the centre, it will also help the Greens voter turnout. So there you go. I mean, I don't think this happens. I don't think this has happened. But I always think about, leaders of the Greens and leaders of Labor getting together, or leaders of National, and saying, how are we going to do this as a bloc? And if they were to say, we are actively going to move to the centre, you guys should take the far left, or the left, centre left and far left, whichever you want to call it. And we don't care if you say, criticize us for not being left enough, because that'll turn out your guys, and we're going to stay centrist, turn out the centres, and together we will rule. I don't think that happens, but I don't know. There's a little part of me which sort of wish it did. We'll just get to the end of this, eh?
On New Zealand roads so far this year, but the government's plan to make our roads safer, hitting a Chris Hipkins roadblock. The plan to lower speed limits, no longer a government priority.
Ooh, yeah.
It's decided to focus on the 1% of our state highway network that's responsible for the most injuries and deaths,
well, that makes
and
sense.
lowering speed limits around schools and marae.
It's a bit of common sense though, isn't it?
Is the people who cause the problems aren't the ones who are going to be following the speed limit. People often will go under if they feel like they need to anyways.
Thanks, everybody.
The Prime Minister's policy incinerator working overtime.
Really interesting to hear one of the comments from the people watching saying sensible. I mean, that's probably what most politicians in a voting year would like to hear. That would be quite a positive word. Like I think about, like things like, oh, what an amazing policy, those sorts of words. And sensible, I think you think about society for the last 3 years since COVID's come in, how often would we think about the relationship between people on the news and as in voters who have voiced their opinions on the news and the politicians? How often would we have thought you'd hear the word sensible as opposed to some other negative words? So I think that word, politically speaking, and as people have been saying in the chat, pragmatically speaking, it's probably a really welcomed word from Labor and from Christopher Hipkins going, yes, we are the sensible choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like I said, I could see the reasons. It's probably very, very smart. But I agree with the chat. Yes, people like myself that are like, well, this isn't good enough for me. I'm taking my vote to the Greens. It's probably very, very true. And if it drags Labor to the centre, they hoover up National's centre voters.
Yep.
And then the Greens kind of pull them left-wise, policy-wise. It's the system that we have. It's a system that I quite like. It's just, sometimes I just want the government to go, yeah, we're doing the good thing. We're doing the smart thing. We're not cancelling all the nice things as well.
I wonder as well about that Green vote. It's like, the more votes the Greens get, the more likelihood you've got a two-party government next year. Like, I don't know where would the Venn diagram be between Labor, the Greens, and Māori Party? I don't know where that would be. Often, if you look at the political compass type things, the Māori Party become quite centrist. But I feel like, would someone rather vote? I feel like if you're going to be a Māori Party voter, tell me if I'm wrong in the chat. It feels like you might be more likely a Green voter than a Labor voter, but they're further apart. I don't know why. Maybe because of the views around treaty issues to do with with more aligned between the Greens and the Māori Party than the Māori Party and Labor. I'm not sure, but I'm sure if the Greens can make themselves a 12, 13, 14% party, then the left wins with two parties in government. Yes. Anything else you want to mention from the chat before we go in and have a look at the Oscars for a bit of fun?
No, let's crack on to the Oscars.
All right. Did you see any of it? Did you hear any of the results?
I have heard the results. I haven't seen any of it. My favorite movie of last year won. I did spend the entire day roasting one of my colleagues because she was so invested in Everything Everywhere All at Once winning
Yeah.
I just took a contrary position and said, nah, it's got to be Top Gun because that made more money, and more money equals best film. Right?
I'm still surprised.
And she
Top
got
Gun was
real
in there.
mad with me. I'm gonna say it was very, very good.
Yep. Well, Everything Everywhere All at Once, lots and lots of awards. Jamie Lee Curtis, that was a little bit controversial from some people. But I don't know. I kind of feel like, I know that people use it as a criticism, like it's just Hollywood slapping their own backs, but I kind of quite like seeing people who have been around for a long time getting acknowledgement. So I kind of quite like that Jamie Lee actually won that. International festival, obviously all international films are obviously all quiet on the Western Front. Everywhere, Everyone, All at Once. The speech by Short Round was amazing. And when Harrison Ford presented, because I was watching it in the background, Harrison Ford presented Best Film, and they cut to Short Round in the audience while Harrison Ford was coming out on stage, and he looked like a 9-year-old boy being all excited again. And then when Everything Everywhere won, Harrison Ford was presenting it, and of course, Short Round was up on stage, very excited to be back with his friend again. Just a really interesting Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, obvious winner. That was a fantastic show. Now this is the conversation that I'm interested in as well. Brendan Fraser, The Whale, winner. So when you watched him win, he looked like he was having a panic attack. And I just wonder, this guy who was George of the Jungle, who was the Mummy in The Mummy, and then kind of became the joke of Hollywood, one of the jokes of Hollywood. Yeah. And wasn't working, and it all went away. Then he gets this show or this movie, which is slightly controversial because some people out there think it's fat shaming. Don't know what you're talking about. Speaking from experience. But I haven't seen all of it yet, but I've got it to watch, and I've watched some of it. Pretty good performance, pretty impressive. And his speech and his reaction when winning it was pretty amazing. No, I don't know. When I say it was amazing, his speech wasn't necessarily amazing. Like it wasn't, oh my God, I'm inspired by the speech. But you just see someone who in the moment had gone, oh, it's like that. Is it Liza Minnelli? You really, really like me kind of line, whoever that was. It's a bit like that. Thank you for bringing me back from the dead. It was sort of that sort of vibe, actually. It was kind of cool. Any thoughts?
It's been really fun to watch. Like, Brendan Fraser has had a really shit run of things just in his personal life. He had a very messy breakup, a horrible, horrible divorce, and just basically disappeared. And like I've seen in internet forums and that sort of thing, like people were just always pulling for Brendan Fraser to come back. And then to come back with a movie like The Whale. Now, there's some people I follow on Twitter that really detest this movie because it is somebody in a fat suit. But I think you saw all the weight that Brendan Fraser put on in these sort of desert years that he was doing. I think a lot of his performance was driven from that. And I haven't watched the whole film. I feel like I need to be in the right mental state to watch it.
For sure.
But the clips that I've seen of it, he deserves every inch of that award. The speech I've seen from that movie is incredible. The acceptance speeches he's already done for like the Golden Globes and that sort of thing. He's not holding anything back emotionally. I'm stoked for the dude. I really am.
Yeah, I'm not gonna play this because I don't really want to be pulled. So I'm not gonna play the whole thing. I'm just gonna play you the announcement, and you just watch his reaction. I think he's bottom left. Just watch his reaction. That's all I want you to look at. Just his reaction.
And the Oscar goes to
bottom left. Watch him.
Brendan Fraser.
Yeah, almost a flinch.
Yeah, it's almost like a panic attack. I mean, I'm not saying it is that, but it's like this, like, oh my God, sort of moment. And he was very emotional. I don't think he necessarily cried on stage. That's nice, Colin Farrell. But you could just see. I mean, I'm sure for everyone who gets one of these things, it's important and emotional. But there was something more in it, and I kind of I felt that as well for him. And look, you know how some African American people can give permission to others to use the N-word. I feel like I can give Brendan Fraser permission to be in a fat suit. So that's all right. You've got permission. You're okay. You're allowed to. I wanted to play you the best joke though. Can I do this now?
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah,
best
yeah, go
joke,
for it.
best joke from Jimmy Kimmel in it. It was about the editing. The editing award was the best joke.
Anyone who's ever received a text message from their father knows how important editing is. Editors
It's not the best joke yet. It's coming still.
do amazing things. Editors can turn 44,000 hours of violent insurrection footage into a respectful sightseeing tour of the Capitol.
Best joke of his any of his monologues. It was very, very funny. So very, very funny. So yeah, the Oscars. Everything Everywhere All at Once. If people haven't seen it, you should see it. I saw a friend of the show, Jeremy Elwood, tweeting out during the last couple of days, am I the only person who doesn't really like that movie? And I'm like, oh.
And you know what? I deleted a reply to him. I was like, oh, I don't think he knows me that well. I was just like, it's okay, man. Everybody's allowed to be wrong. You know, that easily was my favorite movie of last year. So and it was weird, and it was done on a shoestring budget, and the guys that edited it were working off YouTube tutorials and stuff like that. It really is. Everybody loves an underdog story, and that really was it. People with deserving careers.
The editor one, right? Best editing. He got up. He was actually probably one of the best speeches, because he was. You would think someone to be so overwhelmed at the moment, but he seemed quite chilled and relaxed and laid back. And he was like, "This is only my second film," and I'm like, "Wow." And he wasn't saying it like this is easy. It was like shock. And then he thanked everyone for supporting him during his career. I went, "Hang on, if this is only your second film, what kind of career have you sort of had? What are you talking about there?" So, but no, it was very cool, and I'm glad it was a good one, and especially after last year's, it was nice. Huge thanks to JN. JN, thanks for your super chat. Great chat. Thanks guys from JN. Appreciate your super chat there. Anyone wants to get involved with that, you are more than welcome to. Or super stickers you can do as well. I'm not entirely sure what super stickers are. I'm too old for that, but here you go. Sorry, Chewy, you're about to say.
I do see some people in the chat going, "Oh, look, it didn't do anything for me, or I didn't get it, or didn't like it, or that sort of thing." I did see a really interesting comment, and I could say this because I am part of this community. But ADD people with ADD and ADHD fucking loved that movie.
Of course,
because there was so much going on, and it's like, oh, let's go to the sausage fingers dimension. Look, I just like the fact that it was so chaotic and so all over the place that when the emotional gut punch of that movie landed, it came from a direction you weren't expecting. And I loved it. But not everybody has to love every movie.
I thought
it's not for everybody. I can imagine that for some people it would be like, oh yeah, no, I hate this. Sausage fingers is going to haunt my dreams. Why is there googly eyes on a rock? All of that sort of stuff. I've had years of the Oscars when just a movie that has left me completely cold. It's clean swept everything, and I go, well, that's cool. I don't understand that the Oscars is at times fucked.
Yeah, fair
and
enough
you can print that on a t-shirt.
All right, we will do. Speaking of t-shirts, thanks to our patrons. Love having you guys on board. Thanks for being a part of the team. If you want to be involved, get involved, then you can just head to patreon.com/Big Hairy News. If you're watching the screen right now, rather than listening to the audio podcast, as you can see as well, this podcast broadcast does turn into an audio podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify as well. If you feel so inclined, a subscribe on Apple Podcasts would be greatly appreciated. It helps us in the charts. We sometimes float around the what do we call it? The political news. I can't remember what chart we're in. We're sort of somewhere between sort of number 10 and number 20 most days. A few more people got on there and listened to our audio podcast as well. It's rated and reviewed us. It might help us in the charts. And the thing is, if we get helped in the charts and we get a bigger spread, then that means when we go to look for people, we go to look for guests, we want to get people on board, we can say, yeah, we're the number 3 show in New Zealand on the Apple podcast charts, which apparently means something to some people. So head yourself along to those. Subscribe to the primarily, if you can, if you're going to do it, primarily the Apple feed, Apple podcast feed, because that helps us in those Apple charts, which are deemed sort of the most reputable, I guess. Hey, before we go, Chewy, new podcast coming out tomorrow morning for Let's Talk Funny. How do you feel about well, here we go. We've been talking comedy. I'm going to play a clip.
Yep.
This is a very short clip from the Let's Talk Funny podcast coming out tomorrow morning. I'm talking with Michelle Acorn. I'll have to try and stop it halfway through because there's an advert that plays at the end of it. But a very interesting question. We were talking about comedy. We were talking about why, we're talking about not cancel culture, but why sometimes when people mention, they make a joke, then 10, 20, 30 years later, they're being held accountable for it. And I said, but not Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy gets a pass on Raw.
Eddie Murphy's got a pass.
Absolutely.
And why is that? And I said, but is it because it hasn't aged, aged very well? Are we more astute to it now? And this was Michelle's response about comedy aging. And she basically said no comedy ages well, which prompted a question in me.
It's one of those interesting things to me was I was told, don't be too much of a feminist.
Sorry, that's the wrong clip. That's the wrong setup. We'll try this one. Completely different clip. That wasn't the right setup for that at all.
I don't think any comedy ages well. Is my answer to that. Billy T. James comedy doesn't age well at all. I'm old enough to remember Dave Allen, and this is 1960s television, Wheel Tappers and Shunters Social Club, and my wife's so fat, when she sits around the house, she sits around the house. Les Dawson. Sorry I did that. I don't know why I did that. That was awful. Cut that out. So no comedy ages well. It's all representative of the zeitgeist and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable today. And so I can't answer why Eddie Murphy has attracted less opprobrium.
But that's right, isn't it? There's not really anyone who's ever really called him out, like publicly in a big way. And if that is the case, if no comedy ages well, why is anyone held accountable for what they said 20 or 30 years ago?
I have thoughts about if somebody said something dreadful 20 or 30 years ago and you say, you said something dreadful 20 or 30 years ago, and they go, yeah, I did, and I would never say that again. Yeah. So how you doing?
That's the clip. So I won't play the other one because it was talking about other stuff, but that's coming out tomorrow morning, New Zealand time, Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
It's a really good question. Earlier, I was asked who some of my favorite comedians are, and one of my favorites is Jim Jeffries.
Yeah.
And if you compare some of his topics from his early specials or his early stand-up career, you're like, oh, Jesus Christ. And then he's quite publicly come out. He's used, in material he has gone, some of the things that I've said are horrible. And you learn and you grow and all of that sort of stuff. I'm still going to say fuck. I'm still going to say cunt. But, he's learned a lot, because you don't just start in one place. I think if Eddie Murphy was still out there and touring something with the content of Raw, yes, we could literally burn him in the square. That would be allowed.
The point that kind of flew into it was a really interesting conversation. You guys should check it out. We talked about all sorts of stuff, from white privilege to comedy to her upbringing of her great grandparents coming across in 1913 and some comedy as well. But we were talking about Kevin Hart, and this is the thing that I've been trying to figure out, because although some people think I'm a little bit of a troublemaker, some people do, I actually do like to know where the boundaries are, so then I know when I can cause trouble, because I know when to cross the line. I like to know where the lines still are, and the lines for this question are very blurred for me at the moment, because the thing about Kevin Hart, he did exactly what Michelle just described. He sent some homophobic tweets 10, 15 years ago. At the time, he apologized. Didn't even get caught out by the mob 10, 15 years later. At the time, he apologized. But then, 5, 7 years ago, whatever it was, he still got his hosting job at the Oscars thing. So he actually did what Michelle said, and then yet still suffered the consequences on it. And so this is the debate. And I know I've said this numerous times on this podcast, and I don't know if I'll ever stop saying it, is that we are in flux at the moment in society with words, and we're trying to figure out what it all means. And until we get to the end of that, like what words mean and how
Which will never happen.
Well,
We
it
are
does though.
always in flux.
No, it does. It does happen.
Yeah. And then the goalposts will shift again.
Well, maybe the goalposts for those words won't shift though, and there'll be new words and thoughts and feelings and meanings. But once we have a clearer understanding as to what all the rules are, and at the moment the rules are very muddy, then we'll be able to decide whether. It doesn't mean you have to abide by the rules, but it's like if the road rule says 50, you can then choose to drive 50 or choose to drive 80. If the road rule was like that, it was a picture of someone going, then how do you know if you're speeding? And if you get pulled over for doing 60 and they go, it's a 50 zone. Yeah, but hang on, the road rule said this.
A lot of
Then
it's
what?
down to the people that do constantly push those limits. I mean, Rob in the chat has mentioned another one of my favorites, actually, Frankie Boyle. A lot of his stuff is rough, brutal, harsh, right on the holy shit, did someone just say that level of comedy?
Yeah.
And as Rob points out here, the only joke he regrets is one where he accidentally supported imperial propaganda. I've got a lot of time for Frankie Boyle. He's amazing.
All right. I think we'll leave it there, eh? We don't need to get into a conversation around comedy. That means
And Michelle is amazing. Watch the podcast tomorrow. I'm going to.
It's a really good one, actually.
She is an absolute institution in the New Zealand comedy scene and has been doing it for a long time.
Yep. And if you're not sure how to find us, then just follow either me or Chewy on Twitter. Yep. We'll put I'll link to that podcast tomorrow will come out. It's going to be on YouTube, Twitter, Spotify, Google Podcasts as well. And other than that, I think we're done for the night. It's actually, I thought we'd be done by a bit earlier tonight, but look at us, eh? Going over.
Early night in our traditional hour-long podcast.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just before we go, apparently I heard this as well. Faulty Towers coming back. What an
all right, we're going for the hour and a half. All right.
What a
Faulty
travesty! What a
fucking
travesty that Cleese is bringing Faulty Towers back. He's been quite controversial in the last couple of years, wanting to be the anti-woke person. I just wonder if it's going to be as bad as it actually sounds.
Just so shit. I often wonder with Cleese, like, was he shit back in the Monty Python days?
I mean, he was. No, his
like,
stuff is seminal. Like, I mean, and now he's just seminal. But I think, I actually think, I mean, Faulty Towers was groundbreaking. I mean, the stuff that they did was groundbreaking, but he's just turned into a curmudgeon-y old, boom.
Yeah.
And my fear is he's going to shit all over the grave of Faulty Towers, one of the greatest sitcoms there has ever been, with a bunch of, trying to make political points and trying to purposefully offend the woke brigade with what you think is true comedy. That's my concern.
I can see it coming, can't you?
Yeah, totally.
I could see it like it's a ship on the horizon full of bullshit. It's definitely coming.
Rose says time and a half. That's good if we go a bit longer.
Oh, there we go.
What's 2.5 times 0? 1.5 times 0?
It'd be 0.
Okay, well, that's not effective. All right, team. We'll catch you tomorrow night. Maybe we'll do a deep dive into Faulty Towers. We will catch you tomorrow night. Thank you for sticking with us tonight. We appreciate seeing y'all. Appreciate you actively engaging in the chat there. And we'll be back tomorrow night from 9 p.m. for another edition of Big Hero News. Stay safe, and we'll see you in about 23-ish hours. Hooroo, team.
Cheers, man.